Even a game like Final Fantasy VII, which is widely considered one of the greatest games ever made, is not without its issues. And though its issues might not be as plentiful or bothersome as lesser games, it does have some. Square Enix will be hoping to fix as many of them as they can with Final Fantasy VII Remake and all of the successive installments of this massive remaking project. But before that, here we're going to take a look at 10 faults that the original Final Fantasy VII often gets criticized for. Random battles. This is a criticism that can be applied wholesale to most older JRPGs. Random battles were not just common, they were a staple among turn-based RPGs back during the days of the PS1 and even before that. And as time has gone on, those issues have, in retrospect, seemed even more frustrating to many people than they did before. Being bombarded with randomly occurring battles is an issue that such games suffer from, so even though this isn't a problem that's exclusive to Final Fantasy VII, it is a problem. Though how much it bothers you will probably vary depending on how much tolerance you have for random battles. There's tons of people who aren't bothered by them too much or at all, and if you're someone who grew up on the games with random encounters, you might not find them frustrating going back to Final Fantasy VII even today. Localization issues. Final Fantasy VII had an infamously bad translation back when it first launched. The game was riddled with grammatical errors, spelling mistakes, instances of repeated dialogue, and weirdly named items and at times even enemies in English and in several other Western languages. The German translation is considered particularly bad. Unskippable summons cutscenes. The first time we were all playing Final Fantasy VII and we used summons, the cutscenes that followed were a sight to behold. They were flashy and epic and emblematic of the game's high production values. But when you have to watch those same cutscenes every single time you use summons, it could get on your nerves, especially considering how long some of them can be. Worse still is the fact that unless you play the game on PC with mods, those cutscenes cannot even be skipped. Chocobo breeding. Chocobo breeding has to be among the worst side activities in Final Fantasy VII, or even the entire series, to be frank. Pretty much every single aspect of this activity was an absolute chore. It involved a ton of grinding through random encounters. You were forced to participate in races, which weren't fun enough to even be able to carry all of that exposure. You have to focus on raising their stats. And worst of all, the core aspect of the breeding activity was completely random. So even if you did everything else perfectly, the actual final result was based completely on luck. We wouldn't mind seeing this activity getting completely removed, or at least heavily altered in the remake. Yuffie. Final Fantasy VII's cast of characters boasts some of the most memorable and beloved personalities we've ever seen in video games. But there are a few bad seeds in there as well, and the baddest of them all is Yuffie, a character who is nothing short of insufferable every time she opens her mouth and every second she exists. She's whiny, she talks crap about the other characters all of the time, she's completely self-involved, and those are not even her worst qualities. Thankfully, she's an optional character, so you can at least completely ignore her existence if you want to. Calm flashback. To be completely honest, for a first playthrough, the calm flashbacks are actually really cool. They provide a great deal of narrative context, and as far as stakes and momentum for the story are concerned, this is where things start really getting good. But on repeat playthroughs, this section is a bit of a chore to sit through. It's a bit too long, and knowing that it's keeping you from being able to go out into the overworld and really dive into the meat and potatoes of the experience makes it feel even more winding. Wutai Side Quest. Chances are, if you've played Final Fantasy VII, you have bad memories of the entire Wutai side quest. The very definition of a pace killer, this entire section felt out of place in the entire game, and going through it was a tedious exercise. Yuffie is also a pretty prominent character here, and we've already spoken about our dislike for her, which makes the whole thing even more unbearable. Sure, it's a side quest, which means it is avoidable, but finishing it is also the only way to get Leviathan, so missing it entirely is not exactly a great option. Cosmo Canyon. The Cosmo Canyon section has redeeming qualities of its own, in that it puts the limelight on Red 13, who's a solid character, but the negatives here far outweigh the positives. The dungeon is winding and annoying to get through, and getting through the area is an exercise in patience in and of itself, due to its poorly designed layout. Great Glacier. The Great Glacier is probably one of the worst sections in all of Final Fantasy VII, if not the worst. Conceptually, it has some really good ideas, and desperately making your way through an environment that is a nightmare to traverse while your resources continue to dwindle can be a pretty tense experience. But Final Fantasy VII infused that concept with aggravating mechanics that made it a chore more than anything else. And by the way, just thinking about the process of getting the Alexander materia gives us PTSD flashbacks. Fort Condor. The Fort Condor mission is a perfect example of a great idea being let down by poor execution. A minigame that is essentially a strategy game in your RPG? Sounds pretty cool, right? Well, the execution basically turns it into a mundane, tedious activity, and the fact that there is really no point to even doing it, especially since you get the Phoenix materia regardless, makes us question why it was even in the game to begin with. And that about does it for this video. If you enjoyed what you watched and want to see more from Gaming Bolt, you can always hit that subscribe button and turn on the bell icon next to it. That way you will never miss any of our videos.